So, you find yourself using RESTful APIs from a variety of services. You've probably used ones like Twitter, the one provided by Twitch, or Facebook even. But how do you actually go about making those APIs? Have you ever given it any thought? Well, it's actually not as hard as people make it out to be. RESTful APIs are so common and there's so many frameworks to build them that it's very easy to actually build your own now. So I'm actually going to show you how to do it today. And today we're actually going to be using Python because I love Python, and we're going to be using Flask because Flask is a very lightweight framework that allows you to build APIs very easily and quickly in Python. Now I'm going to start by saying this tutorial by no means, or this video rather, by no means should have you saying, oh, I'm an expert. Like, I'm not an expert in writing APIs. But this is a very good way for you to get started. So like I said, we're going to be using Flask. So Flask is just, like how it says, web development one drop at a time. You can go, I'm basically just going to go through their quick start today and show you examples and how to run them and things of that nature. So yeah, this is pretty much it. So I'll also link this in the description of the video as well, so that way you can take a look, because there's tons of content in this module that there's no way I would hope to be able to cover in one video. Okay, now that I've gone over the basis of what Flask is, we're just going to go ahead and use it for the remainder of this video. So everything I'm showing you is going to be, Flask specific, but a lot of this knowledge goes to any sort of framework that allows you to build RESTful APIs. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use an actual example straight from the docs. So I'm going to pull that up. I'm going to split my screen so that way you can see both the code and we'll be able to run it at the same time. All right, so now I'm going to pull up a sample from the, really quickly to get started, I'm just going to pull up a sample. I took this example basically straight from the Flask's API documentation website. I think it's a very easy example for us to see, and it will really help us get a good understanding of what's going on here. So I'm going to actually split the screen in half, so that way it'll be very easy for you to see, for you all to see what I'm doing as far as both the code and when I run the code, right? So let's open up that sample. So now this example is really very simple. And this is, like I said, straight from their documentation. This is how the basic way of importing Flask and setting up your Flask application and setting up a basic route. So I'm going to go into it in a little bit more detail, but for now, all you need to understand in this little example is that when we call our API on the root route, right, this is the / route, the very root route that there is, we're going to get a hello world text as the response, right? So I've gone over the basic information as to how to basically create a very simple Flask app using the exact sample from the documentation. We're going to run it. Now, it's important that before you run your Flask application, you have to set the Flask app as an environment variable. So I'm going to do that. Now I'm on Linux, and more specifically, I'm on Debian, so I can just do this. I'm going to do export Flask _app. This is the environment variable you have to create. If you have any questions about this, just check their documentation because they do a really good job of explaining it, but I'm just going to do it just like this. And you have to set it equal to whatever the Python function or the Python file is that you're going to run. So mine is named sample.py, so I'm just going to do sample.py, and that's going to be it. I'm going to hit enter. So now I've set my environment variable, I have my Flask app, and now what I can do is actually run Flask. So I installed Flask with pip, so all I'm going to do is Python -m for module, and so I'm going to tell it to run the Flask module, and the Flask module has a command called run. I'm going to add an additional command here as well. I'm going to add host. This basically just allows the API that's going to be hosted, the Flask app that's going to be hosted, to be seen by the network. Currently, I'm actually running this code on a separate machine on a server I have in my home. So to do that, and to have it visible to the other computer in which I'm actually doing the demonstration on, I have to reveal it to the network. So that's what I'm going to do there. And I'm going to hit enter. And now we should see it's going to say, hey, this is a development server, and it's going to by default serve on port 5000. So now to test this, I'm just going to open this very simply in Postman. So if you don't know what Postman is an application that basically helps you test API endpoints very easily. So I've put the IP address, now this is the local IP address of my machine. So I'm just going to hit the send, and hey, the response I got back is hello world, and I got a 200 status code letting me know everything's a-okay. Now, if I pull up the other window, let me pull back up my terminal window. So now we're gonna see that this request was made by this computer on my server, and it just says what request was made. It says a GET was made at /. So that's exactly what we were expecting. So now that we've gone through the basis of how to get a Flask API set up and everything, let's go ahead and get into some of the more details and go through some, I would say, more advanced examples. Okay, so for the first actual more useful API example, we're going to go through an API that's going to return some JSON objects to us. So what I've done here is I've made a route. So now I'm going to explain this a little bit more than what I did. The import JSON, that's not important. This is just to load in a JSON file that I created. I just created a mock.json file from a mock data generation website to load. So that's not important, but what is important is this app.route. So this decorator I didn't really explain in the sample example, but now I will. So what this allows, so Flask is looking for these route decorators on top of functions. And so it's saying that if this route is hit, so if the / route is hit, the function directly underneath that, the function that's being decorated is what's going to be called. So what's going to happen is this base route function is going to be called, and it's going to run, and it's going to return this JSON data. And the JSON data was loaded when the app itself was created, right? So now if we come over here and we just start up our app using the same command we used earlier, we should see it's running on port 5000, right? And now if we go into Postman and we do a GET request to that location, boom, we see all this data got returned. Now, like I said, all this data is just randomly generated from a random generator website. But the point is, this is essentially what you'll get from most APIs. You'll just get some sort of JSON response. See, we've gotten an array of objects in which there are first name, a last name, an ID, and a gender for each entry in this data set. So that's pretty much it. So the key takeaway from this example is you can pretty much return JSON. You don't have to just return like a sentence like hello world. All right, so let's move on to another example. So now we have something, now we're gonna show you how to do more than just a GET route. Or like by default, Flask serves every route as a GET route. You can specify other routes. In these examples, I'm gonna go through a few using GET and post and just post, right? So let's get started. So first things first, a few things are different. One, I've changed the route. So it's no longer just /. I actually have a / post route, which means I'll have to do that IP address of my server / this route to actually hit this route successfully. There is no default route anymore. A lot of APIs will not respond to a default route. And I've also specified the methods. So by default, all of your route decorators will accept GET unless specified otherwise. So because I have explicitly stated that methods is equal to an array and is equal to this list, and inside of this list, I only have post. This means this route, the post route, will only work for post requests. So any GET request to this route is going to fail. So now we come in here, and this is very similar. I've changed the return though. So now I'm returning. It's going to render as JSON, but in Python this is a dict. But it's going to render that information back, and it's also going to send this a 200 status code. By default, all routes will send a 200 status code unless specified otherwise. I just like to explicitly state it right in this example, so that way it helps you all see it a little bit better. All right. So we're going to minimize this really quickly and we're going to test this route. So /post. All right, so now we're going to try this response. Now remember, we weren't doing anything for a GET request on the post route, so let's see what happens. 405, the method not allowed. So we got an error, and Flask sends back this error, and if we look in the terminal, we can see why. It's going to say, oh, okay, so it showed that we tried to get a GET on /post, and it returned a 405, and it's because we didn't tell Flask how to handle that. So it says that that's not allowed at that route. But if we change it to a post, and we send it, all of a sudden, boom, your message successfully posted. And we get that status message and we get the 200 AOK code in which we expected to get. So now let's look at the next example in here. The next example is very similar, but now what I'm doing is when the server responds to us, it's going to actually respond to us with text that we send it. So usually in a post request, you're supposed to send a body of text, right? That's what it's expecting. Server APIs use this for all sorts of things like authentication or for you to send data to the server. That's how you do it through a post request. So now if we come in here, go back into Postman, and let's come over to the body and let's add some raw JSON data. And I'm just going to add a channel, and I'm just going to say Shandon codes. So now when we send this to the post to route, we should see that this JSON is going to be in part of the response sent back to us, right? And that's exactly what we see. So we see the message that we successfully posted, and we returned the body that allowed us to see what we sent. So this is the exact JSON we sent, right? We sent just a JSON with channel Shandon codes, and that's exactly what we got back. Now, that's an important thing to note. So you see this request.getJSON? That's how I actually got that request body back from the request we made. And you can import that request from the actual Flask module itself. So if you wanted to get the data from a request, you would do that. Now again, you can go into the Flask documentation and there's a plethora of information you can get from this request object. So just go through and take a look and figure out all what is there. But in this case, we just used the .getJSON, right? All right, so now let's look at the final one in this example. So this is /post3 route. So now this is going to accept two different methods. I let it accept both get and post requests, and depending on which method, which we check using the request.method, because remember this request, like I said, it has a plethora of information. One of the things it can tell you is which method was selected. So if we did perform a get route, it's going to tell us that we performed a get route instead of a post and send 200, and vice versa. It's going to show us if we do a post, it's going to say we posted, and we're going to get, instead of a get, and we're going to get 200 status codes. So let's try that out. Let's come down here and do post 3, and let's just do a simple post, right? Now it doesn't matter what we post in the body, it doesn't, our API is not taking that into account. And so see, you chose to post instead of get. And if we change over to a get really quickly, we're gonna see you choose to get instead of post. Exactly what we expected to get. Very often when you write an API, you want users to be able to get information based on something in a URL. Like the URLs are not static, right? So like in this example. So what this route is doing is it's gonna say, of course, the /user route. You all are used to that by now in this example. But now you see I have username in 2 brackets. So what that's telling Flask is that any string of text can come after user. And that can be anything. So in this case, we've made it username because, well, 1, for readability, and 2, we're going to actually return the username that somebody requested on that route, because again, the server can see that sort of information, and we're going to return that in our response. So some important things to note here are, like, if you have username here spelled the exactly way, it's case sensitive. You have to have that exact parameter here, because when Flask calls this route, it's going to call it using whatever placeholder this is. So username is the variable set here. You have to use it here, and it has to stay consistent. This cannot be user. It can't be anything else. It will error. It will tell you, hey, I didn't get that parameter from the URL like I was expecting to. So let's go to, and because we didn't specify any sort of method, this is going to default to a GET request. So let's go over here and let's do a GET request to user / and I'm going to do Shandon codes. And now if we do this, we should see, returning user with username Shandon codes. Ideally, your API would do something like give you account information based on that. So this is how like Facebook works, for example. You know, when you go to Facebook / and then the username, it's going to show you their profile page, and that's how Facebook's API knows which username to serve you. And just to prove I can do anything else, so I'm going to do Teja, and then see, so returning user with username Teja, right? All right, and the last example I'm going to show today in this little video is going to be error handling. So very common is it that if you were writing an API, you want to give users some sort of error letting them know that they've done something wrong. Rather they've used a route incorrectly or they've tried to use a route that just doesn't exist. I'm sure we've all stumbled across a web page we've gone to and we've gotten a 404 page does not exist or some sort of error like that, right? Resource does not exist. So this is how you build it into the API. And this is one way of doing it. There are a ton of ways of handling errors with Flask, and I encourage you to check them all out. But this is just going to be a very simple example just for the sake of this video. So we'll notice here I've defined two routes. So this route, so I've actually defined a route / hello, and it should return a message hello with a 200 status code. And now I've done something a little bit different here. You see, this isn't the decorator that we've been using. This isn't app.route, this is app.errorhandler. So what I've told it is, this is app.errorhandler for 404. Now 404, now this is very important. If you're building APIs, you should know status codes. But 404 is just the resource not found, page not found error, right? So that's what I'm saying to get back to that. Now, when you use the error handler decorator here, then you can pass an error to this. You have to pass an error to this method, and you don't have to use it inside the method, but you do have to pass it or else it will error. And that's what I'm going to return to the user. So I'm going to return them a message, and instead of calling it message with a key message, I'm going to call it with a key error. And then using an F string, I'm going to actually return them the string version of that error and a 404. So this will be very helpful to a developer because they'll know, okay, I used a route that just doesn't exist, and they should get a more detailed error message, right? Now you could do some much more extensive error handling, but that's just a very simple way of going about it. All right, so now let's just go into Postman and check it out. So now if we go to the / hello route, and we're just gonna do a GET request to it, it's gonna say message hello. That's exactly what we expected. But if we go to any other route, because we didn't specify any other routes, so all other routes will end in a page not found, a 404, and we've written that one error handler that will listen for 404 errors specifically. So if we type something like hello to, we're gonna get the error. So error 404 not found. The requested URL was not found on the server. If you entered the URL manually, please check the spelling and try again. That's actually a pretty descriptive error that it's given, right? But I'm sure you as a developer, your API can do better. Also, let's look right here. So Postman did get the correct status code back. So it did get a 404 not found. We could try this with any other route. We can try it with the root route. We can try it with the route Google. We can try it with the route YouTube. And we can try it with the route, subscribe. And all of those didn't work, but you should subscribe. I'm sorry, that was a shameless plug. Well, really the whole point of this video is to show you, well, Python's an awesome tool. Flask is a really awesome tool. And you can build your own APIs, and it really isn't necessarily as complicated as you might think. I hope you liked the video. I'm probably going to be posting some more videos about Python and just other cool frameworks that I really like. I just wanted to post this one really quickly because I think APIs are something that everybody needs to know how to interact with, and I think it's very important, especially if you're somebody who's doing job interviews or building web applications, that you understand how RESTful APIs work, and what better way to understand how something works than if you make one yourself. All right, till the next one. See you there.